The doctor called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Not my regular appointment day. Not a reminder about my blood pressure check. A real call. Dr. Marcus Webb, his personal cell, the number he gave me 3 years ago and told me to use only if something felt wrong. I was sitting on the back porch when the phone rang. Had my sweet tea. Had the ceiling fan going. Had nothing on my mind except whether the Grizzlies had a real shot this season. He said, "Raymond, I need you to bring me that last bowl of soup." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "The one Desiree brought Sunday. Do you still have it?" I did. I hadn't finished it. Left maybe a third of it in the container in the back of the refrigerator, the way I always do when I'm not as hungry as I thought I was. He said, "Don't eat the rest. Don't throw it away. Put it in a sealed bag and bring it to me tomorrow morning." First thing, I asked him why. He was quiet for 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then he said, "Your blood work came back, Raymond. Some of the numbers, they're not adding up the way they should. And I want to rule something out before I say anything else." I asked him what he was trying to rule out. He said, "Just bring me the soup." I sat there on that porch for a long time after he hung up. The ceiling fan kept turning. The tea got warm. And I looked out at the yard Loretta used to love, the one with the rose bushes she planted along the back fence in 2009, and I tried to make sense of what a doctor means when he asks you to bring him your soup and won't tell you why. I'm going to tell you what I figured out, and I need you to stay with me through the whole thing, because what happened over the next 3 weeks, if I hadn't answered that call, I wouldn't be here telling you this. Before I go further, where are you right now? What city? What time of night? Drop it in the comments below. I want to know who's out there listening to this with me tonight. My name is Raymond Elwood Calloway. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a senior structural engineer for the city of Memphis, Tennessee. The kind of job where you look at a bridge and you know exactly how much weight it can hold before something gives. I retired in 2019 with a full pension, health benefits, and the house I'd paid off in 2014. I built that house the right way. Loretta and I built it together. Not the structure itself. I hired people for that. But everything that made it a home. The kitchen she wanted with the double oven. The sunroom facing east so she could have her morning light. The guest room we turned into a reading room when it became clear that grandchildren weren't coming as fast as we'd hoped. Loretta Marie Calloway, nee Bratcher, died 26 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 63 years old, and she was the most organized person I have ever known in my life. She left instructions for everything. The insurance, the accounts, the passwords. Even a list of what to do with her clothes, her jewelry, her collection of African violet plants that she had been tending since 1998. She did not leave instructions for what I was supposed to do with the loneliness. I have 2 sons. Terrence, 41, lives in Atlanta with his wife and works in finance. Marcus, not my doctor, different Marcus, is 38, lives in Nashville, owns a landscaping company. Both good men, both busy, both showing up when they can, which is not as often as any of us would like. And I don't say that with bitterness. That's just how it goes when your children are adults. What I did not expect was Desiree. Desiree Bratcher Okafor is Loretta's younger sister, 59 years old. She was widowed herself about 4 years back. Her husband, Franklin, passed from a heart attack, and she lives about 20 minutes away from me in Whitehaven. We were never particularly close when Loretta was alive. Cordial. Holiday dinners. The occasional cookout. She and Loretta had their own relationship, their own phone calls, their own history I was mostly outside of. But after Loretta died, Desiree started coming around. First it was the repast. Then it was checking in. Then it was every other Sunday, then every Sunday. And then, about 8 months ago, it became soup. She'd show up around 2 in the afternoon with a container from her kitchen. Chicken and rice, vegetable beef, black-eyed pea. She'd heat it up on my stove, set it on the table in front of me, and sit across from me while I ate. Sometimes we talked about Loretta. Sometimes we just sat. It felt like grief work. Like two people finding a way to carry something heavy by sharing the load. I was grateful for it. I was on lisinopril for blood pressure, metformin for blood sugar management, and a baby aspirin every morning. The last one at the recommendation of Dr. Webb since my stress test in the spring of 2021 at Methodist University Hospital showed some minor irregularities. 4 things every morning. I counted them myself, shook them out of the bottles myself, took them with water at the kitchen sink every day at 7:15. Dr. Marcus Webb had been my physician for 9 years. He's 54, runs a private practice over on Poplar Avenue, and he has this way of looking at you when something concerns him. Not alarm, exactly, more like focus. Like he's making sure he's seeing clearly before he speaks. He'd seen that same focus in my blood work at my last routine visit 6 weeks earlier. He'd ordered a second panel. That second panel was what made him call me on a Tuesday afternoon on his personal cell and ask about the soup. I went inside and opened the refrigerator. The container was right where I'd left it. Desiree's chicken and rice from the Sunday before, sitting in the back of the bottom shelf in the same blue container she always brought. My name was written on a piece of masking tape on the lid the way she always did it in her careful handwriting. I looked at that container for a long time. Then I got a gallon Ziploc bag from the drawer by the stove, the one Loretta always kept stocked, and I put the container inside it, sealed it, put it back in the refrigerator, and I sat down at the kitchen table and tried to think. I need to be clear about something. I did not immediately believe that Desiree was trying to hurt me. I am 67 years old, and I have been an engineer for most of my adult life. Engineers do not jump to conclusions. We look at data. We measure load capacity. We ask whether a structure is sound before we decide it needs to come down. What I knew was this. My doctor had called me on a personal number on a non-appointment day. He had asked about something specific that had entered my body. He had asked me not to eat any more of it and to bring him a sample. That was the data. That was the structure in front of me. What I did not know yet was how much weight it could hold. The next morning, I was at Dr. Webb's office on Poplar at 8 o'clock sharp when they unlocked the doors. His receptionist, a woman named Gloria, who has worked there since before I became a patient, looked up at me with an expression that told me she already knew I was coming. Dr. Webb took me back personally. Didn't make me wait. He closed the door to his office and sat across from his desk, not behind it, across from it. The way doctors sit when they want you to feel like equals and not like a chart. And he told me what he'd found. My sodium levels over the past 3 panels had shown a pattern inconsistent with my diet and my medication. There was a compound present in my last blood draw that he'd initially attributed to a possible supplement interaction. But the second panel showed it again at a higher concentration, and this compound was not something produced by any of my current prescriptions. He used a word I won't repeat here because I am not a medical professional and I don't want to get the details wrong. But the category was clear. It was a sedative-adjacent substance, not a prescription sedative. Something that occurs in certain plants, certain over-the-counter compounds, that at low doses causes fatigue, brain fog, elevated blood pressure, and at higher doses can cause organ stress in someone already managing cardiovascular risk. He said, "Raymond, this could be environmental. Could be something in your water, something you're eating without realizing. But I need you to think carefully about what's changed in your routine over the past several months." I thought carefully. And the only thing that had changed in my routine over the past several months was Sunday soup. I handed him the bag with the container inside. He said he'd send it to a lab he trusted. Said it might take several days. Said that in the meantime, I should not consume anything I had not prepared myself, and that I should act as normal as possible with everyone around me. Act as normal as possible. I drove home from that appointment, gripping the steering wheel with both hands and staring straight ahead. And somewhere on the expressway over the river, I realized my jaw had been clenched so hard my teeth ached. I pulled off at the Walgreens on Airways, sat in the parking lot, breathed. Desiree was coming Sunday. I had 4 days. When I got home, I didn't go straight inside. I stood in the driveway for a minute and looked at the house the way you look at a place that suddenly feels different, even though nothing about it has changed. Same white siding. Same porch Loretta picked the rocking chairs for. Same rose bushes along the back fence. Everything the same. Except now I was standing outside of it like a man trying to figure out if it was safe to go in. I went in. I sat at the kitchen table and I made myself think clearly. Not emotionally. I couldn't afford emotional right then. I made myself think like an engineer. What did I know for certain? What did I suspect? What would I need to verify? What I knew, my doctor had found something in my blood that shouldn't be there. The pattern matched the timeline of Desira's visits. He had a sample. What I suspected, that the soup was the vehicle. What I needed to verify, whether this was intentional. Because there was a version of this, a small version, a merciful version, where Desiree was using some kind of herbal supplement in her cooking that she didn't know was interacting badly with my medication, where this was an accident, where she was trying to help and didn't know she was hurting me. I wanted to believe that version. But I am 67 years old, and I have learned that the version you want to believe and the version that is true are not always the same building. So I verified. I went through my house quietly and carefully over the next 2 days. I was looking for anything that felt off, any drawer that had been opened differently, any paper that had been moved. I found it in the study. I keep my important documents in a locked, fireproof box on the shelf behind my desk. The box was exactly where it always was. But the shelf itself, the shelf had been wiped. Not the whole bookcase, just that one shelf, that one surface. Like someone had taken something off it, set it somewhere else, and wiped the ring mark from whatever was sitting there before putting it back. Or like someone had taken the box down, found it locked, and put it back. I keep a spare key to that box in the lining of my winter coat, in the hall closet, inside the breast pocket of a coat I haven't worn since February. Loretta knew where it was. I had not told anyone else. I checked the coat. The key was still there, but the coat was facing the wrong direction on the hanger. I had hung that coat up at the end of winter, the same way I always do, right side facing out, because Loretta used to tell me that's how you keep a coat from getting bent. It was now facing left side out. Someone had gone through that coat. Someone had found the key. Someone had tried to open my lockbox. I sat down on the closet floor. Just sat right down on the floor, back against the wall, and I stayed there for a while. The dark of the closet and the smell of old wool and cedar blocks. Loretta's cedar blocks still doing their job years after she was gone. The box holds my will, my life insurance policies, the deed to the house, the beneficiary designations. The coat was facing the wrong way. I knew then. The merciful version, the accident version that was gone. This was not about cooking. This was about what I owned. And whoever was doing it wanted me gone before I figured that out. Sunday was in 2 days. I need to tell you about my friend Delbert. Delbert Amos Washington has been my friend for 44 years. We met at Tennessee State in 1980, both of us in the engineering program. Both of us stubborn. Both of us from families that had told us we had to work twice as hard to get half as far. He went into civil construction. I went into municipal infrastructure. We ended up in the same city, at cookouts in each other's backyards, watching each other's children grow up. Delbert is 71. He retired 2 years before I did. He's a large man with a silver mustache and a laugh that you can hear from 2 rooms away. And he is the most honest person I know. Not cruel, honest. There is a difference, and Delbert understands it. I called him Thursday evening, told him I needed to see him in person. Not at my house. We met at a diner on Lamar at 7 o'clock. Delbert was already there when I arrived, already had his coffee, already reading the paper the way he does, folded into quarters so he can hold it with one hand. He put the paper down when he saw my face. I told him everything. The doctor, the blood work, the compound, the lockbox, the coat. I laid it out in the order it happened, the way you present findings to a review board. I did not editorialize. I did not theorize out loud. I just gave him the facts in the sequence they occurred. Delbert listened to the whole thing without interrupting. That is rare. Most people interrupt. He just listened, and when I was done, he set his coffee cup down very carefully and said, "What do you need from me?" Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "Maybe you're reading too much into it." Not, "Have you considered talking to her first?" Just, "What do you need?" I told him I needed someone to know the full picture. Someone outside the situation. Someone who could be a point of contact if things moved faster than I expected. I told him I might need him to hold something for me. Documents, copies, whatever I managed to secure before Sunday. He said, "I'll be home all weekend. You call me, any hour, I answer." I drove home from that diner feeling something I hadn't felt in 2 days. Not safe, not yet, but not alone. Friday, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, a woman named Patricia Ann Gould, who handled Loretta's estate and drafted my current will 4 years ago. I left a message with her assistant. I said it was not an emergency, but it was time sensitive, and I'd like to speak with her on Monday. The second call was to my bank. Not to report anything, just to check. I asked a few questions about my accounts. Whether there had been any recent inquiries, any requests for information, any changes to contact information or access. The account manager paused when I asked about contact information changes. She said my email address had been updated 11 days ago. I had not updated my email address. She gave me the new address on file. I did not recognize it. It was a Gmail account with a string of numbers that meant nothing to me. I had her revert it immediately. I changed my online banking password while I was on the phone. I added a verification step that required a callback to my cell number for any future changes. When I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a moment. My email, my bank. Someone had been building access. Quiet, patient, one piece at a time. I thought about that word, patient. Whoever was doing this was being patient, methodical. The soup every Sunday for 8 months. The lockbox. The email change 11 days ago. This wasn't impulse. This was a plan that had been running for a while, and I had been sitting inside it without knowing. The only question now was how far along the plan was, and whether they knew I was no longer inside it without knowing. Saturday was the hardest day. I cleaned the house the way I always clean it on Saturdays, not because I wanted to, but because Desiring knew my routine, and I could not afford to give her any signal that something had shifted. I vacuumed. I wiped the kitchen counters. I put fresh flowers on the dining room table, same as I sometimes do. And I went to the hardware store and bought a small wireless camera, the kind that looks like a smoke detector. I'm an engineer. I know how to mount things. I put it up in the corner of the kitchen ceiling, angled toward the stove and the counter where she always set up to heat the soup. It connected to my phone through an app. I tested it 3 times. Then I went to bed. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark, and I thought about Loretta. Not about what was happening. I'd already thought about that until I'd exhausted the thoughts. I thought about her face. The way she looked at me across the table at breakfast, not saying anything, just present. the way she smelled in the morning, the sound her slippers made on the hardwood floors. She had trusted Desiree. They had been sisters for 59 years. I wondered if she would have seen this coming. I decided she would have. Loretta saw most things coming. She just tended not to mention them unless the situation required it. I wondered what she would tell me to do. I was pretty sure she would tell me not to drink the soup. Sunday came. Desiree arrived at 2:07 in the afternoon, same as always. I heard her car in the driveway, and I was already at the kitchen table with the newspaper when she knocked. She had never used a key, had always knocked, and I was glad for that one boundary that had never been tested. I opened the door. She was wearing a blue blouse I'd seen before and carrying a covered pot, not the usual container, an actual pot, and she was smiling the smile she always carried, warm and a little tired. The smile of a woman who had also lost someone and was trying to keep putting one foot in front of the other. That smile. I had been sitting with the knowledge of what my doctor had found for 5 days. I had been carrying the weight of the coat facing the wrong way. I had been lying awake thinking about my wife's sister, who had been coming to my house every Sunday for 8 months, bringing food she knew I would eat, because I was lonely and grieving and grateful for any piece of Loretta I could still hold on to. And that smile was the same smile it had always been. That was the moment the grief hit me. Not the fear. I'd already made peace with the fear. The grief. Because whatever this was, whatever she had been doing, she had taken something real. The Sunday visits, the shared morning, the connection to Loretta, and she had used it. She had built a structure out of love and used it as a weapon. I said, "Desiree, come on in." She came in, went straight to the kitchen the way she always did, set the pot on the stove. "Made you a chicken and orzo today," she said. "Something a little different. Added some herbs I've been growing." Herbs she'd been growing. I said, "That sounds real nice." I sat at the table. I watched her move around my kitchen, the way she'd been moving around it for months. Comfortable. Familiar. She knew where the ladle was. She knew which burner I liked. She knew where the bowls were kept. She knew too much about my kitchen. "How you been feeling this week?" she asked, her back to me, stirring the pot. "Tired," I said. "Blood pressure's been a little high." She turned to look at me, and her expression was all concern. "You taking your medication?" "Every morning." "Good," she said, and she turned back to the stove. The camera in the corner was recording everything. She brought me a bowl and sat down across from me, and we talked about nothing particular. A neighbor's new car, the weather turning, a church event coming up. Normal conversation. The conversation of two people sharing a Sunday meal. I moved the soup around in the bowl. I lifted the spoon twice. I did not drink it. When she got up to refill her water glass, I moved most of the bowl's content into the container I'd hidden in my lap, a small sealed jar I'd put there before she arrived. When she came back, the bowl was mostly empty. She looked at it and smiled. "You were hungry today." "I was," I said. She stayed another 45 minutes. Washed the pot at my sink. Hugged me at the door. Told me she'd see me next Sunday. I said, "I'll be here." I closed the door behind her. I stood with my back against it and I breathed. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. The way the cardiologist taught me after the stress test, not because I was panicking, but because panic was the one thing I could not afford right now. I had the sample in my pocket. The camera had recorded everything, and Desiree did not know that any of it had changed. But I had underestimated something, and I found out what it was 30 minutes after she left when I went into the study to check the lockbox. The box was where it always was, locked, but there was a piece of paper on my desk, a single sheet, folded in half. I had not put it there. I opened it. It was a printout of a life insurance policy. My life insurance policy, the one in the lockbox, which she clearly had managed to access at some point when I wasn't watching. At the top, in pencil, someone had written a single number. It was the payout amount, $400,000, and below the number, in the same handwriting, "Is this enough?" She hadn't left that note for me. She had left it for someone, and she had forgotten to take it with her, or she had miscounted the papers when she was putting things back. Someone else was in this with her. I took a picture of the note with my phone, put the original back exactly where I found it, folded the same way. I called Delbert. He answered on the second ring. I said, "It's real. And there's more than one of them." He said, "You coming over?" I said, "Not yet. I need to stay in place a little longer. But I need you to know, if I don't call you by 9 o'clock tonight, you call Dr. Webb." He said, "Raymond." I said, "I'm okay. I just need someone to know the clock is running." He said, 9 o'clock. "I've got it." I hung up and sat down at the desk and looked at the photo of the note on my phone. Is this enough? I had been asking myself wrong questions all week. I had been asking, is she doing this? Is it the soup? Is it real? The right question. The question I should have been asking from the moment I saw that coat on the wrong hanger was, how long has this been going on? And the second question, the one that was now pressing against my chest with real weight, who was she asking? I sat in that chair until the light outside went from afternoon to evening to dark. The rose bushes along the back fence disappeared into the shadows. The house was quiet, the way it's quiet when you're in it alone. A specific kind of quiet, not peaceful, just empty. I thought about giving up. I want to be honest about that. I thought I could just leave. Call Terrence in Atlanta, pack a bag, drive to the airport. Let the lawyers handle it from a distance. Let Dr. Webb handle the medical side. Walk away from this house, this situation, this web someone had been building in my own home while I was sitting at the table being grateful for their cooking. But that note, is this enough? Someone had stood in my study and looked at the number and asked whether $400,000 was worth whatever they were planning to do to get it. And they had decided it was. If I walked away, they'd follow, or they'd find another way, or they'd do this to the next person. You don't build something this careful and then stop because the target moved. No, I had to see it through. I didn't build this life to let someone erase me from it. I went to the desk drawer, took out a legal pad, and I started writing down everything I knew in sequence with dates, times, and specifics. Because if I was going to survive this, I needed the record to be airtight. And I needed to make my move before next Sunday came around. I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it. If you were sitting in my chair right then, holding that photograph of that note on your phone, knowing that someone in your own family was building a plan around your death, would you have stayed in that house one more night? Or would you have been in the car before dark? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you would have done. Because the answer I came to that night is the reason I'm still here. Monday morning, I was up at 5:30. Not because I couldn't sleep. I had slept maybe 4 hours. The hard, flat sleep of a man whose body finally surrendered to exhaustion somewhere around 1 in the morning. I was up because I had a list, and the list had a sequence, and the sequence had a clock attached to it. I made my own coffee, ground the beans myself, watched the water go through, poured it into my own cup. I had been doing this since Thursday. No food I hadn't prepared. No beverage I hadn't watched from start to finish. It sounds simple. It was exhausting. Because every cup of coffee you make yourself in your own kitchen is a reminder of why you're making it yourself. I drank it standing at the sink, looking out at the backyard. The rose bushes were still there, still doing what rose bushes do. They didn't know anything had changed. I envied them that. By 7 o'clock, I had called Patricia Ann Gould's office and left a second message. This one more direct. I needed to update my will and I needed to do it this week. Her assistant called back by 8:15 and told me Patricia could see me Wednesday at 11. Wednesday at 11. I wrote it down. By 8:30, I had called Dr. Webb. He had already sent the soup sample to the lab Friday. His contact there, a woman he'd worked with on toxicology questions before, had agreed to expedite it. He said preliminary results might come back as early as Tuesday. He said, "Raymond, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. Are you safe right now?" I said, "For the moment." He said, "Do I need to call anyone?" I said, "Not yet. Let me work through the next 48 hours. He said, "I'm calling you Tuesday. Whether you call me first or not," I said, "I'll pick up." Then I sat down with the legal pad I'd been writing on the night before, and I added 3 more items. The email change at the bank, the timeline of the soup visits going back 8 months, and the note I'd photographed. I wrote down the exact phrasing. "Is this enough?" And I wrote down the policy number from the printout because I had memorized it before I put the paper back. Then I thought about the note. She hadn't written it to herself. People don't ask themselves whether an amount of money is enough. Not in writing, not on a piece of paper they bring into someone else's house. That note was written to be shared. Or it was a response to something someone else had written first, which meant there was a conversation happening somewhere that I was not part of. I thought about who it might be. Desiree had one son, Kendrick. He was 34, lived out in Germantown, worked in real estate. I had met him at Loretta's funeral, a quiet young man with a firm handshake who had said the right things and not stayed long. I had not thought about him since. Real estate. Someone who worked in real estate would know exactly what a paid-off house in Memphis was worth, would know how to think about assets, would understand beneficiary designations and what it meant to be named in a will. I had never changed my will after Loretta died. I had updated the account beneficiaries. That was one of the things Patricia had helped me with the year after the funeral. But the year after the funeral. But the will itself was the same document we had drafted together in 2019, and the executor was Loretta. When a will names a deceased person as executor and beneficiary and hasn't been updated, it creates a situation that attorneys and probate courts sort out. But it also creates a window. A window where assets could be contested, where questions could be raised, where someone patient enough could position themselves. Someone had been patient enough. That's why Patricia Gould was my first call. Tuesday at 9:47 in the morning, Dr. Webb called. I was in the car, parked in the lot at the Kroger on Germantown Road. I had gone out to buy groceries, sealed, packaged things. Nothing that could be easily tampered with. Food I was preparing entirely myself. I answered before the second ring. He said, "The lab came back." I didn't say anything. He said, "Raymond, they found it. There are trace amounts of a compound. It's derived from a plant extract. It's not regulated as a prescription substance, which is why it's not something most standard screenings catch. At the concentrations they found in the sample, over a period of several months, it would cause the exact symptoms you've been experiencing. The fatigue, the blood pressure irregularities, the brain fog you mentioned at your last appointment that you said you'd been attributing to grief. I had attributed it to grief. Grief looks like a lot of things. It looks like tiredness. It looks like forgetting words. It looks like sitting in a room for 20 minutes without knowing why you went there. I had been grieving for 2 years, and every strange symptom I had placed at grief's door, because grief was the explanation that required no further investigation. I said, "Is this something that would have continued to get worse?" He said, "At escalating doses, yes. With your existing cardiovascular situation, the long-term risk was significant. Significant." I thanked him. I asked him to document everything formally, his findings, the lab results, the original blood work panels. I told him I was meeting with my attorney Wednesday and I might need his records as part of what I was building. He said, "Raymond, this is the kind of thing where you should also be talking to the police." I said, "I know." He said, "Sooner rather than later." I said, "Wednesday." I sat in that parking lot for a while after I hung up. People walked in and out of the Kroger with their carts. A woman was trying to get a shopping cart to cooperate near the door. A man was talking on his phone, laughing about something. Normal Tuesday morning in Memphis. Everyone going about their lives without knowing what was happening inside mine. I thought about Loretta again. Not the grief this time, something else, something closer to conversation. I thought, she trusted her. Her whole life, she trusted her. And then I thought, she trusted me too, and I'm still here. I started the car and drove home. That evening was the hardest evening. Not because anything happened. Nothing happened. That was almost the problem. The house was quiet. The camera in the kitchen ceiling was recording an empty room. The lockbox was locked and undisturbed. Nothing moved. Nothing threatened. Just a house at the end of a Tuesday, with a man in it who now had laboratory confirmation that someone had been poisoning his food. I ate a bowl of soup I made myself. Canned tomato, which is not what I would have chosen, but I wasn't cooking for pleasure that night, and I sat at the kitchen table and felt the full weight of it for the first time. Not the anger, the sadness. Desiree had sat across from me at this table 30-something times, had listened to me talk about Loretta, had nodded and said the right things and refilled my water glass and brought me food that I had thanked her for and eaten because it tasted like care. And the whole time, she and her son had been calculating, working the timeline, watching my health decline one Sunday at a time and deciding that it was going as planned. I had asked what she got out of this, and had answered myself. The house, the insurance, whatever was left in the accounts. But there was a deeper question. Did she feel anything? When I said thank you for the soup, when I told her I didn't know what I'd do without these Sunday visits, when I sat there and told her how much her presence meant to me in the first year after Loretta, did any of that land anywhere? Or was it just data? Just confirmation that the plan was working? I don't know the answer to that. I still don't. Maybe I never will. I washed my bowl, turned off the kitchen light, went to the study and looked at the lockbox on its shelf. Then I took it down, opened it, and removed 3 things. My will, my life insurance policy, and the deed to the house. I photographed every page of all 3 with my phone. I sent the photographs to a secure email account I had created that afternoon using a device Delbert had loaned me, an old tablet of his, never connected to my home network. Then I sent copies to Delbert directly. He texted back within minutes. Got them. Locked up. Call me tomorrow after the attorney. I put the documents back. Locked the box. Put it back on the shelf. But I put a single piece of clear tape across the seam between the box and the shelf. The kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. If anyone touched that box before I got back from my attorney, I would know. Wednesday morning, I drove to Patricia Gould's office on Union Avenue at 10:30. 30 minutes early, and I sat in her waiting room and looked at the framed prints on the wall. Botanical illustrations. The kind that are in every law office in the South, and I thought about what I was about to do. Patricia came out herself to get me. She is 62, gray locks pinned back, reading glasses perpetually on her head, and she has an economy to her that I have always respected. She doesn't use extra words. She closed the door to her office, and before she could say anything, I laid the legal pad on her desk. I need you to read this before I say anything, I said. She read it. All of it. Every page, every date, every detail. She did not interrupt. She did not react visibly. When she finished, she set the pad down carefully, took her reading glasses off her head and put them on properly, and looked at me. She said, "The attorney-client privilege covers everything in this room. You understand that? I said. Yes. She said. I need to update your will today. New executor. Terrence or Marcus, your choice. I said. Terrence. She said. New beneficiary structure. We're going to be explicit. Are there people you want removed from any possible claim? I said. Desiree Bratcher Okafor and her son Kendrick. She wrote it down. She said, I'm also going to recommend you contact Detective Reese with the Elder Abuse and Financial Crimes Unit at MPD. I know him personally. He is careful and he is discreet. I said. Dr. Webb said the same thing. I was waiting until I had the documentation in order. She said, the documentation is in order. I'm drafting this today. I'll have you sign this afternoon, and then you're going to call Reese. She picked up the phone on her desk and called her paralegal and gave instructions in the brisk shorthand of someone who has done this many times. Then she looked at me and said, Raymond, how are you holding up? It was the first time anyone had asked me that in a way that felt like a real question instead of a courtesy. I said, I'm managing. She said, you're doing more than managing. Most people in your situation would have confronted her on day one and blown the whole thing up. I sighed. Confronting her on day one wouldn't have given me proof. It would have just given her warning. She nodded slowly. That's right, she said. That is exactly right. I called Detective Reese from the parking lot of Patricia's office at 2:15 that afternoon. He answered himself. No assistant, no voicemail, just a man picking up his own phone. I told him my attorney had referred me. I told him I had documentation of what I believed was a deliberate poisoning over a period of approximately 8 months. Evidence of attempted financial fraud, including unauthorized access to a bank account, and a physical note I'd photographed that indicated a co-conspirator. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mr. Calloway, can you come in Thursday morning? I said, I'll be there. He said, bring everything you've documented. The photographs, the timeline, the doctor's records, if you can get a release signed today. Don't confront anyone. Don't change your behavior with anyone. Can you do that for another 48 hours? I said, I've been doing it for 10 days. He said, good. You've been doing the right things. Thursday. I drove home. I checked the tape on the lockbox, undisturbed. Thursday morning, I sat across from Detective Harold Reese in a small conference room at the Memphis Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit on Poplar Avenue, about a mile from Dr. Webb's office. He was 50-something, built lean, with the kind of patience in his eyes that comes from having heard a lot of terrible stories and choosing to do something about them instead of becoming numb. He looked at every document I brought. He asked careful questions. He took notes in a small notebook with a mechanical pencil the way people do when they've been doing something long enough that the tools become extensions of habit. When I finished, he said, the lab results from your doctor established the substance. The bank records established the financial targeting. The photograph of the note, that's the co-conspirator connection. That's what makes this more than a civil matter. He said they could move on this. He said they would want to do it carefully. He said the most valuable thing would be a controlled interaction. One more Sunday where Desiree came with the soup, not knowing that anything had changed, while a detective unit documented everything. He looked at me and said, that's a lot to ask of someone who's already been carrying this alone for 10 days. I said, tell me what you need me to do. He told me. I drove home and I called Delbert. One more Sunday, I said. He said, I'll be in my car around the corner. Sunday came back around the way Sundays do, quiet and inevitable. I cleaned the house, put fresh flowers on the table, set the kitchen up the same way it always looked when Desiree arrived. The camera in the corner was recording. What Desiree did not know was that there was a second device. Detective Reese had sent a technician over Saturday evening, a young woman who wore plain clothes and drove an unmarked car and was finished in under 20 minutes. Audio and video positioned to capture the stove and the counter and anyone standing there. What Desiree did not know was that Detective Reese and his partner were parked on the street 3 houses down, in a gray sedan that had been on that block since noon. What Desiree did not know was that Delbert Washington was sitting in his Buick around the corner, phone in hand, waiting. She knocked at 2:04. I opened the door. She had the pot again. Different color today. Green, cast iron. She was smiling. "Hey, Raymond." She came in, kissed me on the cheek the way she sometimes did. "I made you black-eyed peas and ham. Real Southern comfort," I said. "Smells wonderful." She went to the kitchen. I sat at the table. I watched her move around the space. Confident, practiced. She knew where everything was, because she had been here 30 times and the familiarity had become a kind of claim, the way a person starts to feel ownership over a place they spend enough time in. She turned the burner on, stirred the pot, hummed something low under her breath. I looked at my hands on the table. I thought about Loretta. I thought about the coat on the wrong hanger. I thought about, is this enough? Written in pencil on a folded piece of paper left on my desk. I kept my hands still. I kept my face neutral. I watched her dish the soup into a bowl and carry it to me with the same smile she'd been carrying through my front door for 8 months. "You need some cornbread with that?" she asked. I said, "No, thank you. This is plenty." She sat across from me. "You see the doctor lately?" she asked. Casual, like any question. "Going next week," I said. "Good." She nodded. "How's the energy been?" "You seem a little better than last time." There it was. The question underneath the question. Checking the dosage. Checking the progress. Making sure whatever she'd been putting in the soup was doing what she expected it to do. I said, "I've been up and down. Some days better than others." She said, "That's natural. The body goes through changes at our age." I moved the soup in the bowl. She was watching me without appearing to watch me. I had learned over the past 10 days to notice the watching underneath the not watching. I said, "Desiree, can I ask you something?" She looked up, expression open. "Of course," I said. "When Loretta passed, what did she say to you?" "In those last weeks." "What did she tell you about me?" Something moved across her face, quick, gone fast, but there. She said you were the best man she'd ever known. I said, "Did she say anything about the house?" The movement again, slower this time to recover. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about estate planning," I said, "making sure everything is in order. I know Loretta would have wanted me to take care of it properly. I was just wondering if she'd said anything to you about what she hoped would happen to things." Desiree set her hands on the table. She said she would have wanted you taken care of. "That's all she ever said." I said, I picked up my phone, which was on the table beside the bowl. I didn't open it, just held it. She watched the phone. I said, "I updated my will this week. Terrence is my executor now. I wanted you to know." The warmth dropped from her face the way a curtain drops. Instant. Complete. For 3 seconds, she was simply a different person sitting across from me. Not the grieving sister-in-law, not the woman who brought comfort on Sundays. Just someone whose plan had just hit an obstacle. Then she rebuilt it. The smile came back, but it was constructed now. I could see the work in it. "That's good," she said. "That's the right thing to do." I also closed the accounts that were linked to the old email, I said. She was very still. "Someone changed my email address," I said. 11 days ago. Bank had to fix it." The stillness deepened. "Raymond," she started. I said, "The lab results came back Tuesday." She stopped. "Dr. Webb sent a sample in." "From the soup." I looked at her steadily. "You've been growing herbs, you said." She didn't speak. "The thing about being an engineer," I said, "is that you learn early that a structure can look solid for a long time before it fails. But once you know where the load is uneven, it doesn't take much to bring it down. Her chair scraped back slightly, just slightly. The knock on the front door was 3 measured raps. She flinched. I stood up from the table and walked to the front door and opened it. And Detective Reese was standing on my porch in his plain gray jacket with his partner beside him. And behind them, down at the street, I could see Delbert's Buick pulling up to the curb. I stepped aside. Reese said, "Good afternoon." He looked past me at Desiree. She had stood up from the table. Her hand was at her collar. The warmth was completely gone from her face now, not replaced by anything hard, just hollow. The expression of someone who had played a long game and just heard the final score. She looked at me. I said one thing. You had Loretta's love. You had my trust. You had a seat at my table every Sunday for 8 months. I looked at her the way you look at something you are deciding to put down and not pick back up. And that wasn't enough. She didn't speak. Reese said, "Ms. Bratcher-Okafor, I'd like you to come with us. We have some questions. I won't walk you through everything that came after in legal detail. That's not the story I'm telling. The story I'm telling is about what it costs to survive the people who were supposed to love you. What I can tell you is this. The substance in the soup was confirmed by the lab. 7 samples tested, including the 2 I'd saved from previous Sundays, stored sealed in the back of my freezer once I knew what I was looking for. Everyone came back positive. The phone records showed 43 calls between Desiree and Kendrick over the prior 3 months, several of them lasting over an hour and occurring on Sunday evenings after her visits to my house. Kendrick had accessed real estate databases to get a current valuation of my property. He had also consulted, through an intermediary, but paper has a way of existing whether you want it to or not, with a probate attorney about the process of contesting a will in Tennessee when the deceased party had not updated documents naming a deceased executor. They had been building a case for after. They had not built a case for the possibility that I'd still be fully functional when the after arrived. Desiree was charged. Kendrick was charged. I will not tell you what sentences were imposed. That's in the public record for anyone who wants to look. What I will tell you is that neither of them was in my house or anywhere near it again. The hardest part of the weeks that followed was not the depositions, not the attorney meetings, not the calls with Terrence and Marcus. Those calls, actually, were some of the most real conversations I had had with my sons in years. When you almost disappear, the people who would have missed you start to understand their own feeling about you more clearly. Terrence flew in from Atlanta. Marcus drove up from Nashville. We sat on the back porch until midnight 2 nights in a row, and we talked about things we hadn't talked about since their mother's funeral. That part was not hard. That part was the unexpected gift buried inside the hardest thing. The hard part was the grief. Not grief for myself. Grief for the relationship. Because Desiree had been my connection to Loretta after Loretta was gone. The Sunday visits had meant something to me that went past the food. They meant that someone who had known Loretta for 59 years still wanted to be near what remained of her. That someone who shared her blood was choosing to share time with me. That had been real at some point. Maybe at the beginning. Maybe before the calculation set in. Maybe she had come the first few times out of genuine grief, and then somewhere, at some point, something had shifted. Had she seen the house differently? Had Kendrick asked questions? Had the idea appeared small at first and then grown? I don't know. I don't know when care became cover. I don't know if I'll ever know. The hardest part wasn't surviving. The hardest part was mourning someone who was still alive. I changed the locks in the 2nd week of October. Not because I thought she was coming back. Because I needed the act of it. Needed a locksmith to come and remove the old hardware and install something new. Needed to hold the new keys in my hand and know that every entrance to this house was now under my authority again. I updated every account. New passwords, new email, new security protocols that my bank manager, a patient woman named Candace, who sat with me for an hour and a half, helped me establish. I made an appointment with a nutritionist at Methodist. Not because anything was wrong. Dr. Webb's follow-up blood work, taken 8 weeks after the last Sunday soup, showed my levels normalizing slowly, the compound clearing my system as my body did what bodies do when you stop poisoning them. I made the appointment because I wanted someone who was paid to look out for my health, actually looking out for my health. I got a new contact for emergency services in my phone and made sure both Terrence and Marcus had it. Not because I expected another emergency, because I had spent 8 months isolated inside a plan I didn't know was happening. And I was not going to spend the next 8 months isolated inside peace I couldn't trust. I called Delbert every Sunday now. Sometimes he came over. We watched whatever game was on. He'd bring food from the rib place on Lamar that he'd been going to since 1987. And we'd eat and argue about basketball and not talk about any of it unless one of us brought it up naturally, which we sometimes did and sometimes didn't. That was enough. That was more than enough. The church helped in ways I hadn't expected. I had been attending Greater Mount Olive Baptist on and off since Loretta passed, more off than on, if I'm honest, because grief has a way of making the places that knew you happy feel too crowded with the memory of what you've lost. But Pastor Williams had called me twice during the whole situation, not knowing anything specific. Just calling the way good pastors call when they sense something is wrong with someone in their congregation. And when I finally called him back and told him what had happened, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Raymond, I want you to come Sunday." I went Sunday. Sister Mavis, who runs the hospitality ministry and has known me since Loretta and I first joined 20 years ago, met me at the door. She didn't say anything about what had happened. She just took my hand and held it for a moment and then walked me inside. I sat in the pew I always sat in with Loretta. I didn't cry. I just sat there and felt the weight lift off my shoulders. Not all at once, but in the gradual way that weight lifts when you're in a room full of people who have known you long enough to know what you carry. That was the first Sunday in almost a year that no one had brought anything to my house that I was afraid to eat. I want to ask you something before I close, and I want you to really sit with it. Have you ever felt unsafe in the one place that was supposed to be the safest? Not from a stranger. Not from something outside. From someone inside. Someone you fed. Someone you opened your door to. Someone you said good night to thinking that the night would, in fact, be good? Because that specific fear, the fear that lives inside your own house, wears a familiar face, speaks in a familiar voice. That fear doesn't announce itself. It comes in slow. It comes wearing Sunday clothes and carrying a pot of soup and smiling the smile of someone who cares. And by the time you feel it, you've already been inside it for months. If someone you know is in that situation right now, if you're reading this and you're recognizing something in this story that you've seen in your own house or your parents' house or your grandmother's house, please don't wait for the coat to be on the wrong hanger. Don't wait for the doctor to call. Trust the unease. Trust the pattern that doesn't add up. And find your Delbert. Find the person you can tell the whole truth to without them asking you if you're sure. You deserve someone who just asks, "What do you need?" By the time winter settled into Memphis that year, I was sleeping through the night again. Not every night at first. Some nights I'd wake at 2 or 3 and lie there in the dark, brain going back over the sequence of things. The coat, the note, the smile at the door, the moment her face changed when I said Terrence's name. Going back over it the way your mind goes back over something it hasn't finished processing. Then one morning in late January, I realized I had slept from 10:30 at night until 6:15 in the morning without waking once. I lay there for a moment and just noticed it. The silence of the house. the gray winter light at the edges of the curtains, the particular stillness of a morning that belongs entirely to you. I got up, made my coffee, ground the beans myself, the same as every morning. Went out to the back porch, even though it was January and cold enough that I needed my coat. The same coat, the winter one, still hanging in the hall closet, still useful. Just a coat now. I stood there with my cup and I looked at the rose bushes along the back fence. They were bare in the winter, the way rose bushes go bare, just sticks and structure. Nothing soft about them at all. But the roots were still there. The roots don't go anywhere. Come April, they'd come back the same way they always do. Loretta had planted them in 2009, and she planted them to stay. I sipped my coffee. Nobody had made it but me. Nobody was watching me drink it. And the morning was mine, completely, simply, without condition or suspicion or the low-grade dread of a man who doesn't know what's in his own food. Just mine. That's what survival feels like, if you want to know. Not the moment the detective knocks on the door. Not the moment the charges are filed or the locks are changed. It feels like a January morning on your own back porch, holding your own cup, breathing air that isn't heavy with anything but cold, and knowing in your bones that you're still here. Still here. I'm still here. And nobody can take that back. If you're still here with me, thank you, really. I don't take it for granted. Not a single one of you who stayed through the whole thing. I tell these stories because I survived them. And maybe someone watching right now, sitting in a house that doesn't quite feel safe anymore, eating food they didn't make, smiling at someone they've started to be afraid of, needs to know that surviving is possible. That getting out is possible. That asking for help is not weakness. It is the bravest thing a person can do. Subscribe. And stay close. I'll be here tomorrow.